Hey, welcome back to COM100. And today we're going to be talking about chapter 11, which is small group communication. And so I have a question for you before we get into it. How many people do you think need to be in a small group to make it a small group? Is it like two, three, 15, maybe 20? It's interesting to think about how to quantify it because thinking about a small group, everybody needs to be heard, everybody needs to be understood, and everybody needs to feel confident that they can talk within a group. And so we're going to get into the specific number that a small group looks at. And let's move on. And this is what your chapter is going to look at. So, defining the characteristics, the different types of small groups, how to be effective, and then also how your individual characteristics can impact like everybody, as well as the benefits and challenges of the group living in a sense. So, let's get into it. Here is your definition for small group. And you're going to see here that it's at least three people. So in order for it to be a small group, there's three or more interdependent people who share a common identity. And I like thinking about this common identity because together you are all working towards something. So you're going to be seen as like one unit. You're all trying to achieve common goals. You can think about maybe a school project when you're put into groups with like three or four people. And so it's like, okay, now our identity is that we're a group and we're going to focus on this specific topic. And our goal is to get an A, right? So with small groups, you're trying to achieve something. And I think that's the biggest thing to look at here. Your book uses an example of with your friends trying to plan a vacation, which that alone right there can be quite difficult, but you have a goal to do this. And so everybody has to be on board to help the group have this vacation, achieve this goal in a sense. So here are the five main characteristics of what makes a small group, what's important about it. So first off, made up of interdependent people. We are each individuals in here and we're all coming together. Now we have small groups, have usually around 3 to 15 people. And I like focusing on this because 15, that's still a lot of people. 10, that's still a lot of people again. But you do have the ability to have your voice heard, to feel comfortable talking to one another, and just being able to like participate in a sense. I know sometimes when I'm in groups, I tend to be more quiet if other people are more talkative. And so I kind of just like step away from the group. But we want to make sure that people like that still have a platform where they can share. Now, our third one is that they share that common identity. So if it's all students from one class, that's your identity. If you're all friends trying to plan that party, your identity is friendship there. Now you're trying to communicate with one another to achieve common goals. So if it's to get that A, if it's to finish that project, if it's to plan that party, if it's to do something within the community, if you're in a religious setting and you're part of that, where groups of people come together, what goal, what are you trying to achieve? I know here at work, when I teach to all of you and then I come back to my office and I'm working with my department, we are a small group. It's a group of about, I'm trying to think, like 7 of us. And our goal is to, promote the communication department to make sure that everybody is supported. And so our goals, we're constantly kind of working on that. Now, what's important here is this last characteristic. And when you are in this small group, you're going to avail yourself to multiple modalities so that people can connect to you. So in your group work, when you're in class, you're going to be there face to face. But then you go home and then you're all on the Google Doc together, this modality of being online. Maybe you text each other, maybe you Snapchat each other, messages. And so this is a way to be connected towards one another. A lot of times this group work or small groups, you're not just stuck to face, especially with the use of technology. I mean, we have it. So let's use it. And we do use it. So these are all important characteristics that go into what a small group is or should be. Now we have these two different types of small group. And now we're really going to only focus on one today, but I think it's important to talk about both. And so the one that we are not going to focus on too much today is the primary groups. I like to look at this one almost as we've already talked about this with culture, with our identity and who we are. And so primary groups, these are the people that will meet our basic life, psychological, and also social needs. I think about family, friends, those people that help us establish that sense of belongingness first within our lives. I think your book says here that these people, it's not surprising, these are probably the first people we see, we hear, we touch, we interact with. These are those people that are just around us. Then we get into secondary groups. And I view this as like you get older, you start meeting people, you start having goals to achieve. And so these are going to be with people with who you wish to achieve specific goals, perform tasks. I think about school, you can think about work here. And they can be short term or they can be long term. Maybe these groups of people, they're only in your lives for this one specific goal. You achieve it, and then that's kind of like it for the group. But with primary groups, that's friendships, that's family. Sure, you don't have the goal of like, let's be friends forever, but you have a goal of like trying to enjoy life together and have the betterment of life together. So most of what we're going to talk about today, it is dealing with secondary groups. I feel like primary groups, culture and identity chapter, we've already done it. So let's talk about how groups then are developed, are made. And here are the 5 stages of how groups are essentially developed. I do want you to think about the example of, a class project. And so sometimes teachers, they force you to be in specific groups. Sometimes they let you form your own groups together. And so in stage 1, this is what that looks like, forming. And a lot of times we experience some kind of apprehension, thinking like, oh no, I'm going to work in a group. We get nervous thinking, is everybody going to pull their weight? Are people going to like me? We get really big into self-presentation here because we want people to perceive us as intelligent and like on top of things. And so with the forming, there's like a lot of emotional feelings here. So forming starts off with group members, they're going to start coming together for the first time and then begin getting to know each other. I look at this as like mingling in a sense. People usually are very cautious of their behavior here because, again, self-presentation, trying to be on my best behavior, all of that. Then we get into storming. And with storming, I look at it as brainstorming. Now, I will say though, and your book does point out that this is when we start to express different ideas, maybe that you and other members have. This is also when you express ideas of how to approach a task, or then also who's going to take on specific leadership roles. This can be difficult because it can kind of like start up some conflict here. Trying to decide who's going to do what, how should we like execute this plan. You can see how the conflict can kind of start brewing here or storming in a sense, right? So when that happens, if that happens, conflict, we got to address it immediately here in stage 2. We got to start talking about conflict, start addressing it like what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, trying to like nip it in the bud so that it doesn't get worse as you start doing more work. Then we have norming. And so norming focuses on when all the members now have agreed on a plan. They've agreed on like how they're going to work towards the goal. They've agreed on like what their roles are going to look like. I look at this one as like, what are the norms now we've established? Let's enact them. Let's do it. Then we have performing, which this goes into like actually doing the work. It says here actually making the required contributions to the group, actually working towards the goal. Have you ever been in a group where someone didn't do any of the work? They were not performing. They were not doing what they were supposed to do. And so with performing, again, there can be anxiety here because you're trying to perform your best. And then also you're putting a lot of trust in other people to also perform at like the same levels. And so we want to make sure, are we all on the same page? Are we all doing the work? And then the last one is adjourning, which means your group is done. So I think that you finish your group work, you turn it in, it's done with, you're waiting for your grade, and it's like, there's no point in us being a group anymore. And so I don't like to view this so much as like a sad stage, but it's more like you completed everything and now you've hit the milestone of like, hey, we're done, and that's good. Maybe you know what works for a group now a little bit better now that you've been in a group. Or maybe you think like, I need to like change up my way of being in a small group. I will say, when we look at these 5 stages, I want you to remember not every group is going to properly go through the 5 stages in this sequence. Some of them might already know each other. So when you're forming, it's not really that intense, right? You already have these relationships. Maybe right away you get into norming then because you already know your strengths and your qualities and your weaknesses. And so we don't have to storm around thinking, what should we each do, providing an opportunity for conflict. So definitely remember that you do not have to go in this sequence. Most groups do, but you do not have to. So let's talk about these roles. I kind of briefly mentioned this, saying that, we have our strengths, we have our weaknesses, and I think it's good to know those and think, what do I bring to the table? What do I bring to the group? And so with balancing group roles, first off, we have formal roles, which these are people or positions that members take on by appointment, by election. They were like chosen for this role. And then we have group roles, which I like to look at it as informal roles. And these are the specific patterns of behavior people show off, the communication that members developed from interacting over time. This is just how you start interacting with people. You can understand them and see what they like to do best and what their strengths are in a sense. Now, we do have 2 different types of group roles, of these informal roles. And both of these, this is really important to remember, they emerge naturally. So it's not by appointment, it's not by election, it just happens through the interaction. So first off, we have task role. And this is when you exchange information about important group duties, important group goals. So you're like kind of focusing on the goal itself that you're all working on. That's where your focus is at. That's what you're pushing through. Then we have the maintenance, which this is working on building the trust and just those interpersonal relationships with the people in the group. So it's not about the goals, it's not about the work at hand, but it's more about like, are we doing okay? What's going on here? You have to have a delicate balance of the two. You got to focus on the work, you got to focus on the goals, but you got to make sure that everybody's feeling appreciative, that everybody has built trust, and that they care about each other to then do the good work. So definitely emerge naturally. You got to work on it though. Now, each member, they're going to kind of play different roles throughout their group's vitality. And so that's okay as a group develops, as you start getting into the work, doing different work, everybody's tasks are going to change. Now, we do have kind of a negative role here, and that's an egocentric role. And so this happens when someone is just trying to disrupt everybody else. Their communication disrupts the group's efforts. Maybe they're distracting. Maybe they're not actually like doing productive things for the group, for the goals. And so this can be kind of disrupting, right? We have this term, social loafing. And social loafing means, give me one second. It means like when you're relying on everybody else, right? Your book says a teammate who relies on other members to do all the work. You're just socializing, you're loafing around, you're not doing anything, and you're just, your group members are going to do the work. So it's like, why should you do it, right? This is a pretty disruptive role. And you don't want to be like that. You want to be a team member that contributes your share, your worth, right? And so we want to be sure that we're all bringing that in together. Thinking about how we can all bring it in together, you got to build cohesiveness. So building cohesion means that with a cohesive group, your members like one another, you have a sense of camaraderie. You just have this sense of like you feel appreciated and you feel like you can trust them and you can talk to each other. So these are 4 ways in which you can start building cohesion with your group. First off, you gotta have appropriate self-disclosure. Of course, in groups, you're going to start talking about your lives, your interpersonal, relationships, what's going on, and you're going to talk about the group's goals and what needs to be done. But you want to be sure that you have appropriate self-disclosure because you're opening up that door for trust and you're not getting into, uncomfortable or awkward topics. You are striving to bridge those differences between one another, working together. When you recognize differences, which that's good, we're all different. Let's celebrate them instead of like letting others down and saying like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't care. Let's just move on. We're human beings and we can constructively manage conflict. So when you're constructively managing conflict here, you're going to recognize that it's happening. But instead of attacking the person, you're going to think, okay, what's the problem here? Let's construct, a good way to go about this conflict. Still being like respectful. And then you're reserving time for external activity. This means engaging in like interaction, communication outside of the goals of the group. So thinking, okay, maybe you can go to lunch one day, having time to talk at the beginning of meetings about your personal life for a quick moment and then getting into business. It's good to like reserve that time so that you can build relationships with one another. My faculty meetings here, the first 10 minutes, we focus on professional and personal lives. What's going on here, but then also what's going on at my home and what I want to share with others. It's nice to recognize that we're more than just this group member, but just for a brief moment and then get into the work, right? Now, another way that we can work towards, a good small group is establishing positive norms. So with norms, these are those expectations about behavior within a group. Thinking about like what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So first off, it's really important to create ground rules, thinking that we're all gonna abide by them because we're all gonna work towards them and making sure everybody's comfortable here. You want to begin and end meetings on time. This is a personal pet peeve. So I was very happy to see that your book wrote, we got to start and kind of end when we're supposed to end because sometimes there's that awkwardness of like hanging around and people just want to leave. By respecting people's time, they're going to be happy and then they can get back to work. Now, it is good, we kind of talked about this, to confront problem behaviors immediately. When you see them, just don't tolerate them and just bring them to light and think, how can we fix this? How can we manage this? Thinking constructively. Now, it is good to evaluate the group regularly, making sure everybody's on the same page, everyone's heard. And then this is just a way to like keep that camaraderie up and showing that respect. Now, sometimes doing this is kind of difficult, and this could lead towards communication apprehension, or if you experience communication apprehension, how this can be a little bit difficult. We do each have different strengths and weaknesses, and some people, communication just is not a strength that they have, it's a weakness. Communication apprehension, it was first developed with public speaking. This kind of got into the idea of like, oh my gosh, I had to give a speech, I had to be in front of a group. And so it's the fear or anxiety about real or anticipated communication. So if you're stressing about a speech you have to give, you're already experiencing apprehension. The problem with communication apprehension here is that it can be disabling, and then individuals, it's going to prevent them from communicating in any and every situation. So any type of communication, it's just going to take a lot out of them. You can see that in a small group, this can be challenging because it's like, We need everyone's point of view, but if we recognize that communication is not your strength, then let's try to work through it and see how can we still push through. Now, if you have communication apprehension, I'm going to hit you with some research here. We have high communication apprehension. That means you have a lot of it. And so these people, they can feel physical symptoms. This includes being nervous, their stomach hurting, a dry mouth, sweating, increased blood pressure, heart rate, shakiness. Also, these people, they have less academic success in classes. They're just too nervous and they're just not going to do well. And so then group members will notice this and they're going to think, according to research, that these individuals are aloof, they're stiff, withdrawn, they're just not into the project or the goals. And it's like, no, they just have communication apprehension. So we need to think, how can we push through and make sure that, like, hey, I'm here and I'm a group member. Your book does suggest, I think, two different suggestions. And if you have communication apprehension, the first thing is to think about what you do want to share with your group members, being prepared and like having, a script ready so you don't have to think about it too much. If you're nervous about a presentation, sharing with your group members, I do not want to do this, I'm nervous. The second suggestion that the book has is to talk to your instructor. This is a big deal because your instructor probably has resources. I also teach public speaking, and this is a very, very real thing. So if you feel this, you're not alone. There's ways to kind of like cope with it, push through it, but still feel comfortable. Then we have argumentation. I want to say that. And so being like, if you're in a group and you feel like you're arguing with one another. And so with this form of conflict, it's the willingness to take a stance on controversial issues and verbally refute others who disagree. This is not only a bad thing, this can be good. And so I say that it's not only a bad thing because a lot of times we see arguments and we think to ourselves, oh no, conflict, bad. But I think that with this form of argument, we're able to foster the exchange of ideas. If I feel a certain way and then someone argues with me and they feel a second way, we're exchanging ideas. And that's good because we want the betterment of our small group. This encourages groups to think through and debate issues. That way, too, we're able to see different perspectives, point of views, and we can choose the correct one or the best one at least. This will boost chances that a group is going to end up choosing the best possible idea then because we thought about it, because we shared and we didn't just, conform and say, yes, that first idea is good. Let's think through it and figure out what's going to work best for us. This can be good for a group. I think that you should do this in a group. This is your last slide of the day. And so I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this lecture that we got to use technology. We use different modalities. And so these are 7 ways to make sure that you are going to have a good quality group meeting, even if it's virtual. And first off, you've got to make sure that you can schedule it to the best of your ability so that everybody can participate. It seems kind of silly, but we need to give people the time and the respect to be able to schedule accordingly. Then you have a clear start and a clear stop time for your meeting. And then you also got to abide by them. You can't just say and then not respect it. It is good to keep your meetings as short as possible. Your book did mention that we should keep like 5 minutes at either the beginning, the middle, or the end about your personal life, which I mentioned that we do for our faculty meetings here. So I think that's smart. I also think too that you need to make sure that your meeting is not too long because maybe we gotta drop that, right? You want to think that all the participants, let's have their cameras on. Now, I love this one because yes, I can understand that it's good that you can see each other. It's going to build community, a sense of belonging, help with the communication. You can see the nonverbal like cues. But I also feel too like we have to be understanding, and I'm sure many of you have been on Zoom before with classes or with work. And sometimes, you just want to turn it off and eat in peace. And then, yes, the book says you should not multitask so you can have a good quality group meeting. But I do think that we should be a little lenient and have grace with each other with the camera. Now, by having an agenda, this is going to help make sure that your meeting stays on track. When you follow it, people know what's coming up, what you've already talked about. Just gives a nice schedule. You want to be sure to involve all group members, try to get their input, and then you can even use an anonymous poll or the chat functions to make sure that everybody can feel heard. And let's use these modalities, let's use all these tools to have the best meeting possible within your small group. Alrighty, that was the end of chapter 11. I hope you enjoyed this chapter, just focusing on small groups, all the different roles, different challenges we could have. But if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll see you later. Have a good one.